thank you for coming. I have gotten such a warm welcome since I've been here, and I have to tell you, this is a gorgeous Jewish community center, just one of the most beautiful I've ever seen, and I just want to congratulate you on having this beautiful facility. I want to thank the Poses family for this series, and John Winchester for all of his help today with the audiovisual and the setup. And of course, my very good friend, my scholarly friend, my personal friend, my colleague, Ed Wright, who invited me and has been very warm and hospitable since I've been here. So thank you all for coming. Now, I was actually here before, and it was 7 years ago. And last time I was here, I gave a presentation on the Herodian Second Temple in Jerusalem. I don't know if anybody was here, but what we did in that talk was we did an archaeological walkthrough exploring, let me see if this works, yes, exploring the Jerusalem Temple, the site in Jerusalem where it stood, the meaning of the Western Wall, both then and now, as a site of pilgrimage, not only to religious Jews, but also to political leaders, to celebrities who go there, as well as to religious leaders. And I also put in a picture of the most recent Pope, Pope Francis, who appeared there and sort of as a precedent, went to the Western Wall with an imam and a rabbi and stood there and embraced them symbolically in the city of peace, Jerusalem, in front of the wall. We looked at and explored in that lecture the multiplicity of barriers in the Jerusalem temple, walls, doors, balustrades, veils, all of these that forge a sort of complex spatial network about sacred space, profane space, distinguishing Jew from Gentile, male from female, layperson from divine. And finally, we examine the important centrality of blood sacrifice here in the temple, and I'll just point out that area in the court of priests here, the altar of sacrifice. These were things that we looked at in that lecture and will be referred to tonight. But that talk ended with the destruction of the temple in 70 CE by the Romans in the first century. And where that talk ended, tonight's talk begins. At this point, where we left off, we will see that the temple, now destroyed, has anything but disappeared from our religious and cultural landscape. And so together, I hope you'll explore with me that it has continued to be very much alive in many different venues. Indeed, over the last 2,000 years, the temple has captured the imagination, the religious imagination, popular imagination. It looms as an icon of sacred space, an archetype of attempts to build God's house on earth. It has been referenced textually, depicted visually, imitated architecturally, and a number of things. And we're going to look at a few tonight from some programs, decorative programs in ancient synagogues and churches, to full-scale replicas in modern theme parks and megachurches. And most recently, the temple has been cast as a leading character in the art film Inferno and in the USA television miniseries Dig, which is an apocalyptic drama that throws into turmoil sort of archaeology, sex, crime, theology, politics all together, and all around the notion of rebuilding the temple and the restoration of sacrifice and the priesthood. So I want to touch lightly on all of these tonight, but what I'd like to do is query this evidence in terms of how the temple is being evoked in each context and for what purpose. And I'd like to also think about what separates and links ancient and modern examples that we would see. And in this, and thinking about it a little bit ahead of time, I've teased out 3 possible paradigms that I'd like to try out, and I'm working on, of this kind of temple appropriation. And I've tentatively labeled them mapping the temple, converting the temple, and revisioning the temple. So let's begin with mapping the temple. So in this first paradigm, I'd like to suggest that mapping an ancient prototype, the temple, onto a new context acts to evoke the memory of the archetype, but also acts to rework and rewrite that memory in the environment of an altogether new and distinct and separate setting. So let's begin with our first example, Dura Europos. And I'm showing you here the Torah Shrine at Dura Europos, but let me just show you a little bit about its archaeological discovery, because I find it myself quite fascinating. In the early 20th century, oops, that kind of went fast there, there was the British and Turks were fighting in this area along the Euphrates River, in this area called where Dura Europos was found. And an incredible story emerged that this desert land all of a sudden started giving up its colors. When they started to dig trenches and hand grenades were going off, all of a sudden the desert was full of colors. And so the British general said, he kind of wired back to London and said, I think we should, move this area of conflict, because it does seem there's some sort of archaeological thing going on below us. So they did, and then they brought in the archaeologist Clark Hopkins and his wife Susan to go and excavate this area, and it has become one of the most important areas, especially in Jewish art. And as they began to lay their trenches and dig and pull away the sand, they discovered many, many murals, fresco paintings. And what they also discovered was that there was a unique way in which they had been preserved. And in fact, if we look at the diagram here, you can see that here is the site where the synagogue is that they found at Dura Europos, and it is along a street that is on the edge of the city, or the garrison town. It was a Roman garrison town in the 3rd century of the Common Era. And all of the properties, if you will, along that street, archaeologists began to call Wall Street, because they were all along this outside wall. And what they discovered was that in the 3rd century, the Romans, the great warriors, the great engineers of warfare in the ancient world, were about to be attacked by the Sasanians, and so they took this synagogue, as well as all of the houses and properties along Wall Street, and they began to build their famous sand ramp. So what we're looking at here is the synagogue, the interior of the synagogue, and here is the Torah Shrine that we're going to look at in a moment. And the Romans then began to fill in the area between the wall and the building with sand. They built it up. They also began to build their ramp inside until the final area was here, and then they took off this top area, and then they had their ramp for warfare to this wall so that they could then fire their arrows and such when the oncoming troops approached. But what they also did was they left perfectly preserved, buried in sand, for all of these years, this wall and even the side walls for archaeologists to discover and interpret. So it's kind of an interesting moment, because it was through sort of the act of warfare that this was preserved, and through warfare that the Dura Europos was discovered. But they also then could see, as we look at that wall, you can even see what was preserved exactly. Here it is reconstructed in the Damascus Museum, but it was only along that sand ramp that we have the reconstruction. Here in the center wall facing Jerusalem then is the Torah Shrine, where the Torah scrolls would have been held. And we see it is front and center, right in the middle of the wall, surrounded by a lot of narrative panels depicting biblical scenes and other narrative scenes. And if we look more closely, we can see that right in the center, front and center and high of the Torah Shrine, we have an image of the temple, the facade of the Temple of Jerusalem, and it is surrounded by other things associated with Jerusalem as well. The menorah, the lulav and etrog, and here is a narrative image of Abraham and the sacrifice of Isaac, also associated with this mount, or Mount Moriah. So the question then is, what is this image of the temple doing in the synagogue? The temple had been destroyed. There's no more priesthood. There's no more sacrifice going on in the synagogue. But what we know is that the iconographic or pictorial presence may be operating as, in some ways, a substitute, either for windows or doors through which one would have prayed towards Jerusalem. And in fact, it might be bringing the presence of the temple inside on the Jerusalem wall to provide that sort of directional map. So here we have this notion of mapping the temple into the synagogue, mapping it onto the synagogue iconography. And that this presence of the temple in the synagogue may act to evoke sacrality and impart some sort of vicarious or residual sacrality of the temple to the synagogue, thereby reconstituting the space of the synagogue itself, imparting sacred space to the synagogue. Okay, let's think about that mapping, and now let's change gears and look at another ancient example, very, not that close by, but not too far in time period from the 6th century, but it is a Christian church, and we move from the wall mural or fresco to mosaic. So we're looking here then, you can see this map, you can see the Dead Sea is here, and this is Mount Nebo, and here there is a chapel, the Chapel of Theotokos, Christian chapel from the 6th century. And what we see here is that in the chapel there was a mosaic floor, and it was behind these dividers. There were once chancel screens in these troughs dividing that space, sacred space from, say, profane space. And as we look into this area, we can see that there were 4 legs of a Christian altar where Eucharistic service would have taken place. And right here in front of it, as one walks in, is an interesting sort of schematic ground plan, if you will. And it's flanked by these animals that would have come towards it. And there is a Greek inscription from Psalms that says, "And they shall lay calves upon your altar." So it's definitely referencing sacrifice, the sacrifice of sacrificial animals. But this notion of the altar is twofold. It's clearly referencing this altar too. And scholars who excavated this and have worked on it have looked closely at this image and seen that it is a ground plan of a structure in a sort of portico where we see courtyards and we see a burning fire in some sort of altar area, and then possibly a hidden room or holy of holies. And most scholars agree that in fact it is referencing the temple in Jerusalem. And here you can see the excavation report that I took a picture of, showing the different courtyards and matching them up with the courtyards of the temple in Jerusalem. And it makes a lot of sense because in early Christian religion, we have a lot of references to what is going on with priestly sacrificial symbolic sacrifice, if you will, and what went on here in the Jerusalem temple, and again, that altar of sacrifice in these courtyards, divided by walls and barriers in the court of the priests. And we certainly have this area divided off and these two associated with each other. So how is it functioning? How is the temple's image functioning here? Well, clearly it is giving a long and sacred pedigree to this institution by evoking something so ancient and renowned and biblical. It's also referencing that, like sacrifice of old, there is sacrifice of new. In this case, it would have been symbolic sacrifice on the altar administered by the priest. And in addition, it actually functions where one can stand, if you're the priest who has entered, directly on the temple. It provides a theological platform from which one can then administer the symbolic sacrifice. But there's more. If we look at this image and we think about those images we just saw of the temple courtyards, they are all rectangular in plan. And here we have an image of a temple that is interestingly put in a plan that is curvilinear in shape. And what we see going on here is that the temple image may be mirroring and echoing the apsidal shape and volume of the church itself. So in some ways, we may see a reverse mapping, that yes, we've mapped the temple onto church ecclesiastical space, but the church can also rewrite and sort of boomerang mapping, as I've called it, also work on reforming the legacy and memory of the temple in the church's own image. So it's a very interesting case. Two cases on mapping the temple. Now, this idea of morphing the temple itself brings us to our second paradigm and our introduction of the modern world. And that idea of morphing the temple goes hand in hand with the idea of converting the temple. And for this, we need to go to Orlando, Florida. So these ancient tactics and strategies around mapping the Jerusalem temple seem to take on a very new twist in the 21st century, when there is a reanimation of Jerusalem and its temple in a new biblical theme park called the Holy Land Experience in Orlando, Florida. Has anybody been? Good, a couple of people, great. So this theme park, located in the tourist mecca of the world, it calls itself a living biblical history museum and condenses 4,000 years of different histories into 15 acres of sort of fun in the sun theological entertainment. It is a theme park after all. Its initial cost was $16 million just to open its doors, and there have been many additions since then. And it recreates the city of Jerusalem between the years 1450 BCE and 66 CE, before the destruction of the temple. It's advertised as the total sensory experience, blending sights, sounds, and taste to transport guests 7,000 miles away and 3,000 years back in time. Dominating and defining the theme park stands a towering 6-story replica of the facade of the Jerusalem temple, of Herod's temple, built to 1/2 the scale of the original. iTech Productions, who also did SeaWorld and Universal Studios, designed and produced this project by referencing Aviona's Jerusalem model, which some of you may have seen in Jerusalem. It was once at the Holy Land Hotel and now is at the Israel Museum, which simulates white Jerusalem limestone and golden filigree on the temple's architectural surface. Like Cinderella's castle just down Interstate 4 at Disney World, the temple at the Holy Land, and here we can see it here on the map of the theme park. The temple serves sort of as a backdrop and an anchor orienting the visitor's experience from any vantage point in the park. Now, the park was created and opened by Zion's Hope, a Christian ministry that specializes in proselytizing to Jews, very much part of their mission, and it has been recently bought by Trinity Broadcast Network, a popular American faith-based broadcaster of religious television and media. The park's status as a not-for-profit religious organization exempt from paying taxes to the state of Florida, as well as its controversial synthesis of Christian evangelism, public commercialism, and representation of Jewish history, naturally have sparked a number of debates. Arriving at the park, a mock-up of Jerusalem's Damascus Gate, combined with elements from other historic gates from Jerusalem, greets the visitor upon leaving the car. And here, of course, is the real Damascus Gate in Jerusalem. Inside the turnstiles, visitors are greeted by the blast of a shofar, while employees, all of whom must have a relationship with Jesus and are self-affirmed Christians, walk around in Cecil B. DeMille-style robes, interacting with the crowds. In addition to the larger-than-life reconstructions, the park also boasts the world's largest indoor model of first-century Jerusalem, of course, with the temple at its center, where educational sessions are conducted daily by their local biblical archaeologists. In the old scroll shop, their gift shop, Jewish and Christian gift merchandise is available, such as Jewish menorahs, ritual prayer shawls, and yarmulkes. There are action figures, including an alluring Esther, Peter, John, Moses with a burning bush accessory, as well as matching Jewish and Christian mugs, one with God's name in Hebrew, the Tetragrammaton, and the other, Jesus Christos, in Greek. Fully integrating the symbols of the two religions are the Star of David necklaces merged with Christian crosses made from olive wood from the real Holy Land. Now, this merging theme that I'm pointing to here will be important, so let's keep that in mind. The temple acts as sort of the fulcrum of the park's layout and the literal backdrop to Christian dramas that are performed there daily. On the one hand, the temple acts as a historical stage set for events that took place in Jerusalem. The real backdrop being presented, of course, is the authoritative space, sacred space of the temple itself. And just to remind us, in the Herodian temple, and I use an Alec Gerard model here, the presence of sacrificial blood on a large and central four-horned altar took center stage, you can see it here, and defined the layout and function of the space itself. At the Holy Land Experiences temple shows, the centrality of blood and sacrifice is recapitulated in a dramatic presentation with the high priest where gestures of sacrifice take place, but a giant red silken cross literally replaces animal blood on a smoking four-horned altar. This strange juxtaposition of cross and Jewish altar, both instruments of sacrifice, acts to convert the actual physical structure of the Jewish temple and its accoutrements into a Christian understanding of the death of Jesus and the definitive blood sacrifice. Criticism has come from many sectors of the Christian community concerned about the Holy Land Experience's potential to trivialize and consumerize faith. And the Jewish community has been the source of also criticism, taking issue with the motive of the founding president and chief executive officer of Zion's Hope, Marvin Rosenthal. Rosenthal was a grandson of Orthodox Jews. He converted to Christianity as a teenager and was ordained a Baptist minister at the age 33. He calls himself a Hebrew Christian, and his goal has been to bring the gospel message to the Jews. And that was one of the reasons this park was built. The mission statement of Zion's Hope tells us that the purpose of Zion's Hope is a simple one, a bold one, to graciously proclaim to the Jewish people their need for personal salvation through Jesus the Messiah, etc. Many Jewish leaders have perceived this mission as disrespectful to the integrity of the Jewish religion, and such proselytizing efforts ignited a number of protests from the local Jewish community as the park opened its doors to the public in 2001. In addition to the temple, other biblical landmarks appear in the Holy Land experience and serve theatrical purposes for Christian dramas, such as the Qumran Caves, site of the Dead Sea Scrolls. In the daily show Behold the Lamb, Qumran forms the backdrop for Jesus' torture and bloody walk to Calvary. In the midst of cell phones ringing, cameras clicking, video cams rolling, and tourists eating ice cream, a blood-drenched Jesus stumbles and falls, is nailed to the cross, crucified, taken down, and found missing from the empty tomb. A woman calls out, "He is risen," and the crowd finally glimpses a resurrected Jesus cleaned up in white robes. This risen theme is carried throughout the park in the topiaries in the landscape architecture. Afterwards, of course, visitors can line up for a photo op with a bloody-handed friendly centurion or pose rolling back the stone at Jesus' tomb. In Orlando, Christian employees engage in an interesting series of what Jeffrey D. Feldman calls cross-dressings. That is to say, evangelical Protestants suiting up as ancient Romans, as Jesus the good Jew, and as bad Jews who heckle Jesus during his ministry's show. And finally, the theme of cross-dressing takes on a literal sense in the ancient festivals show when the temple is physically clothed in a red silken cross, converting the Jewish temple and its altar area to Christianity's preeminent and iconic symbol. One of the more controversial exhibits may be the Jerusalem temple's own archetypal forerunner, the Wilderness Tabernacle. And the website states, inside the Wilderness Tabernacle, join other guests on a remarkable high-tech multimedia exploration of Israel's ancient priesthood, which points to Jesus Christ, the Lamb of God. The show begins with a recording of Hebrew prayer from Yom Kippur. Our guide is a priestly descendant of Aaron, Moses' brother, and the show portrays him lighting the menorah and offering sacrifice, and culminates with steam shooting out of the Ark of the Covenant at 40 miles per hour, they tell us, and a scene that's very evocative in my mind of either Iron Chef or Raiders of the Lost Ark. I can't figure out which one. At the end of the performance, voices chant that one day the promise of Zion will be fulfilled, the burnt offerings of the ancient Hebrews will lead to God offering the perfect lamb to die for the sins of the world. And a white outline of Mary, Joseph, and the baby Jesus flash on the screen. As Burke Long has written, it is a de-Judaized construction of historical Judaism. I would like to show you a film clip. Let's take a look before we finalize our discussion of the Holy Land experience. Let's see if this works.
TBN's Holy Land Experience in Orlando, Florida is an amazing place where you can step back 2,000 years in time and experience the wonder of ancient Israel. See the glory of the Wilderness Tabernacle through an incredible live presentation.
The Ark of the Covenant, crafted precisely according to God's exact instructions.
Walk through the sights and sounds of a Jerusalem street market.
I learned a lot about the culture during that time and how the people really lived in early Bible days.
And see the wonder of the Great Temple. Examine a stunning 45-foot model of ancient Jerusalem with daily presentations on the history of the city.
It's amazing. I've never seen a model like this before.
And be a part of biblical history through powerful reenactments of great events, including dramas highlighting the ministry of Jesus, from his teachings and miracles to a moving passion play portraying his crucifixion, burial, and resurrection. The Bible will come to life as you experience the great plan of God through time. Presented by an amazing cast of actors, singers, and biblical archaeologists and scholars. In the scriptorium, you'll see the history of God's Word from ancient days to the present as you walk through a priceless collection of manuscripts and scrolls arranged in settings representative of their times.
Welcome, my friends. You have found me at a pivotal moment, for my dangerous task is nearing an end. Yes, the stories you have heard are true. I have made the first translation of the complete Latin Bible into English, the language of my own people, the language of the common man.
And additional shows and presentations highlight the glorious music and history of our faith.
What I like most, I think, is the music. The singers kind of transport you to another place in time.
The new Crystal Living Waters attraction combines water, light, and music in an incredible and inspirational presentation.
Okay, so in that clip, and as we've discussed it, I think that one of the things that we should think about here that may distinguish this modern example of appropriating the Jerusalem temple is that there's an effort in this case not to distinguish Judaism and Christianity. For example, this is one of the tapestries in the gift shop where there's a grafting together of Jewish and Christian symbols as some harmonious entity. So there's more of an effort to dissolve differences between these different communities. And we also get that from some of the speakers at the Holy Land Experience. And I'm just going to mention this very quickly. It's changed hands, as I said, to Trinity Broadcast Network. Things have changed quite a bit there. And when you go, it's much more commercial now. They have cut out images of Jesus at the gift store and at the ATM machine. And all of these things are for some people who actually thought that the old endeavor to recreate Jerusalem in the first century now has been really sort of gone downhill. Okay, the Holy Land Experience and the reconstruction. Let's move quickly to one other modern example of converting the temple, and this is the harnessing of the symbolism of another great biblical prototype, the Temple of Solomon, inaugurated in 2014. This is the Temple of Solomon located in Sao Paulo, Brazil, where it takes the temple referencing to Goliath proportions in this 18-story high, 180-foot tall Solomon's Temple, and it just amplifies biblical dimensions into a mega Christian sanctuary that accommodates 10,000 worshipers. It's equipped with a helicopter landing pad and is the brainchild, there's the interior, of the bishop there of the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God. So here, his desire was that his congregants could not go to Jerusalem, all of them couldn't, but that they should at least, this is a quote, at least once tread upon the ground and touch the stones that witness the miracles and great events described in the Bible. So he brought $8 million worth of Jerusalem stone, imported it from Israel as a revetment for the entrance and the center walking aisle and main pillars of this $300 million temple. Jewish and Christian symbols mingle and permeate the site, from a full-scale replica of the Ark of the Covenant covered in gold leaf, dozens of minarot lining the interior of the church, and biblical inscriptions throughout. The Universal Church has merged the individual participation with temple sacrificial ritual, and again has been very, very vocal about everyone having the opportunity to surrender their lives as holy and pleasing a sacrifice to the eternal. Harsh criticism has come from multiple quarters. The bishop has defended the Brazilian temple, and others have called it a mockery, abuse of sacred space, a copycat, political delegitimization of the significance of Jerusalem. And what we see here then really is a very young church of 37 years young, tapping into a 3,000-year-old Jewish symbolic history in an effort to, again, have and gain some of the legitimacy around that sacred history. Now, this has become now one of the focuses of an independent filmmaker, Israeli-born Yael Bartana, and she recently critiqued this endeavor with a film called Inferno, where she uses images of helicopters airlifting the Ark of the Covenant, the menorah, and Jerusalem stone out of their homeland and into this new Temple of Solomon. So she has made a number of references to this going on. She begins her film with this sort of utopian group looking as the helicopters deliver these sacred relics, but the film basically also goes wrong. We see that the priestess inside is sort of satanic and begins, and then a fire begins, and the entire temple is destroyed. So this film is meant to challenge viewers to reflect on the identity and history and what it means for each of their communities. Okay, that cinematic effort leads me to my final example and the final paradigm, and that is the third example of representations of the temple in this new medium, and I've called it Revisioning the Temple. This is an Israeli-American television co-production, DIG. This dramatic miniseries opens with the scene of a red heifer being born, inspected by rabbis and trusted to the care of a yeshiva boy, while plans take place in Jerusalem for the rebuilding of the temple. It's a 10-part action thriller from USA Network, and it cuts back and forth very excitedly among images of Orthodox Jews retrieving the breastplate of the high priest from the Israel Antiquities Authority in the Rockefeller Museum, evangelical Christian cult members cloning a boy-aged high priest who is trained in the judgmental arts of Urim and Thummim, and a 21st century Essene who purifies himself and attempts to thwart any plan to rebuild the Jerusalem temple. Its protagonists are, it's an Israeli, an American FBI agent and detective, and they are out to investigate a murder, and in doing so, they stumble upon archaeological activities and sacrificial activities under the Temple Mount, all set within a modern and turbulent apocalyptic Jerusalem context. Temple purity traditions are sort of turned upside down as in purity baths, the mikvaot we see in these films, skinny dipping and lovemaking taking place in these ancient purification things in a decidedly secular direction. And I can tell you that the two directors, again, it's an Israeli-American production, are very intent on moving away from religiosity. So they want to give a very secular approach to this problem. So we've seen a number of examples here. Do we have time just to show the trailer just of this? Okay. So here is the trailer to dig, and then I will conclude.
The body was found this morning by two Arab teenagers.
An American citizen has been killed on foreign soil. It's my job to find out what happened.
Bury something in the ground that means that much to that many people, someone's gonna want to find it.
The last rites. It was some kind of sacrifice.
You already screwed up one case. I'm not gonna let you jeopardize another.
What the hell are you doing here?
My job.
He's my suspect.
Stop! What are you not telling me?
He's not ready.
It's time.
You're small men. In the end, we mean nothing.
3,000 years of history waiting to be discovered. If you believe in that sort of thing.
Okay, so as we've seen this evening, the Jerusalem temple, long after its destruction in 70 CE, has continued a vibrant and animated afterlife throughout late antiquity to this very day. I've tried to suggest some different paradigms across the historical record of mapping, converting, revisioning, in which the temple has been strategically co-opted, appropriated, repackaged within artistic, religious, and political settings. There are, of course, provocative overlaps among all of these examples and paradigms, but the one thing that they do all have in common is the intentional channeling of the Jerusalem temple as a powerful vehicle in the identity formation of religious, political, and historical groups. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joan. She's graciously agreed to take questions. And so I'll just walk around with this. And as you remember, I've been away for 3 months, but I'll hold the microphone while you ask the questions.
Yes, I have a question.